So in this movie, I'm going to focus on the tools inside of Photoshop. So this tool panel over here has all the different tools that you'll use in Photoshop. And as we've discussed earlier, if I click on any one of these tools, their options become available up here in the options bar. So if I'm on the Move tool, I have the Move tool options up here. If I'm on the Zoom tool, I have the Zoom tool options up available at the options bar. Same with any of these other tools. Another thing that you need to be aware of is a lot of these tools have other tools that are buried underneath them in this panel. So notice, let's say that I click on hold on the brush tool here. There are other tools under it, the pencil tool, the mixer brush tool, things of that nature. So we're going to talk about the tool panel and a lot of these tools that are in here. We're going to give a brief overview of what each of these do. And then as we move through the class, we're going to be getting a lot more comfortable with all their options. So we're just going to get a brief overview of all of them right here. So the ones that I'm going to start with are the zoom tool and the hand tool. And so using the zoom tool, if I click on the zoom tool, I'm able to get its options up here at the top. By default, I think scrubby zoom is checked on. And if I click and drag with the zoom tool back and forth, I'm able to zoom in and out of an image. As I zoom so far into an image, at some point I'm able to see it at the pixel level. I've already turned off the extras in View, Show, Pixel Grid. That by default is on, so you may zoom in and see these white lines in between your pixels. I like to have that off, so I choose View, Show, and uncheck Pixel Grid to get rid of that. But Scrummy Zoom is on right now. I'm able to zoom in and out of a specific area of my image. I actually don't like to use Scrubby Zoom. I actually like to draw a marquee with my zoom tool to zoom into an area. So if it's off and I click and drag with my zoom tool, I'm able to create a marquee, and as soon as I let go of that area, it zooms specifically right into that area that I have highlighted or encased in that marquee. If I wanted to go back out or zoom back out, I could hold the Option key down. Notice that changes my zoom tool to a negative and I can zoom back out, or if I want, I can just go up and manually in the options bar choose zoom out, and now I'm able to zoom out with my image. I'm also able to just double click on my zoom tool and it zooms to 100%. So whether I'm zoomed way in or zoomed way out and I double click on my zoom tool, it automatically goes to 100%. So down here I'm able to see I'm at 100%. Now as I'm zoomed in, you'll see as I get so far as to where my image can't be contained within the window, it gives me these scroll bars over here on the outside. I could use my scroll bars, but another quicker way would be either to hold the space bar down and get the hand tool, or click on the hand tool itself. And this allows me to move my image around. The space bar is a great shortcut to get to the hand tool because it's the largest key on the keyboard, and the hand tool is one of the most versatile or popular, I guess, tools that you're going to be having to go to as you work on your document. Because as you work on a document in Photoshop, obviously you'll be able to zoom in on a specific area and work on it maybe with your brush tool, and you get to a certain area and you don't want to have to switch to the hand tool. You can just hold the spacebar down, and that way I can move over, and when I let up, I go right back to the tool that I was using. That also works with other tools. You'll notice as I scroll over any of these other tools, like the marquee tool, I'm able to see that the M key is the shortcut for the marquee tool. So if I hit M, I jump to the marquee tool. If I hit B, then I move to the brush tool. It's the quick key shortcuts that are shown in the little brackets right after their names when I roll over a tool and show it. So M and B will bounce me back and forth between the marquee tool and the brush tool. And the neat thing is, if I just hit one of these quick keys, it automatically jumps me to that tool. But let's say I'm using the brush tool, I've hit B, I'm using the brush tool, and I just want to temporarily move to the marquee tool and then have it go back to the brush tool when I'm done. If I don't just click the M key to go to the marquee tool, if I click on the keyboard and hold it, I will temporarily be using the marquee tool until I let up on that key, and that'll jump me right back to the brush tool. So that's called spring-loaded keyboard shortcuts. If I click on a shortcut key or tap it on the keyboard, then it automatically goes to that tool. If I hit that key on the keyboard and hold it, it'll use that tool while I'm holding it down, and then when I let up, go back to the previously used tool. So that's spring-loaded keyboard shortcuts. Some other options down here at the bottom. Well, before I get off of the hand tool and the zoom tool, you should know that using the hand tool and the zoom tool isn't changing your image at all. It's just changing how it's viewing it inside of this window. You can also choose on the hand tool and you can rotate your image. So if I wanted to rotate my image, I could use this rotate. Now be aware, this is really just to visualize the rotation inside of Photoshop if I'm using something and I want to rotate it around and I feel more comfortable drawing a line back and forth this way horizontally than vertically. I can rotate my image around to get different views of it. Although if I print this image like this, or if I print it like this, or if I print it like zoomed way out, I'm still going to get the exact right side up image that comes out of the printer. If I actually wanted to go back and rotate my image upside down and have it print upside down, I can double click on my rotation view to get back to its normal view, and I can go to image rotation, and I could rotate it 100 degrees or 90 degrees or something like that, counterclockwise or clockwise. Change my image so that it will print out differently. But these tools under here just visualize it differently inside of Photoshop and don't actually make a change within the image itself. Underneath the zoom and the hand tool is the color blocks. And so I can see my foreground color and my background color right here. So if I'm going to fill a shape that I fill a marquee selection, or if I'm going to use my paintbrush or whatever it might be to paint a specific color, it's going to come from the foreground color here. So if I paint with my paintbrush, I'm going to get a black line here. If I double click on this chip right here and I open it up, I can change my color to a different color. I can choose from different hues. I can pick a blue here, and now when I use my paintbrush, it's going to paint with blue. If I use underneath here the eraser tool and I erase, it's going to erase back to whatever is in the background color. So if I have white as my background color and I'm using an eraser, it's going to erase back to white. If I double click and change my background color to something like green, and then I use the eraser, it erases back to green. We'll talk about later the layers panel and how you can erase back to not color but transparency and erase back to underlying layers. And we'll get into that in a later class. But now for the most part, realize that you can move back and forth with your eraser tool and your brush tool by hitting their quick key combinations and fill with these different colors by changing or double clicking on your color chips to get the color picker and changing your colors that way. Another thing that you can do if you ever want to go back to default black and white is to click this little button right here. You can also hit the D key on the keyboard and it will go back to the default colors of black as the foreground color and white as the background color. I can swap between those colors by clicking this little arrow, which makes the foreground color white and the background color black. The quick key combination for that is X, so I can move back and forth between the two. So if I've ever got several colors picked and I want to jump back to the defaults, I can hit the D key or the X key to swap back and forth between the two. The tool that's underneath the foreground and the background is the quick mask mode. We'll get into quick mask mode later. It's a lot more of a complex method of creating masks and selections. For now, you should know though that if you've got quick mask selected, things are going to work a lot different than if you don't have it selected. Or I can create custom selections with my rectangular selection tool or my elliptical marquee tool or my lasso tool. So I'm able to drag and create selections, fill those selections, move items around. We'll talk about all the intricacies of making these selections. What is inside of these little dotted lines, or marching ants as Photoshop likes to call them, is what's selected. What's outside of the marching ants is what isn't selected. So we'll talk about how you can combine these selections by holding Shift and several different selection techniques in a later exercise. So these are your selection tools for the most part right here. Choose select, deselect to get rid of them. There are some more advanced selection tools like the quick selection tool right here, where let's say that I wanted to select this area of the eye. I can click and drag and it automatically kind of selects similar colors all at once. So I can pick up a quick selection that way with the quick selection tool. I can also use the magic wand selection tool to click on a specific area of like colors and it'll just pick up that area of selection. So these are some of the other selection tools that are a little bit more advanced. Underneath that tool would be the crop tool, and the crop tool allows me to make a selection of my image and crop to a specific area. So if I wanted to crop this image to just the eyeball or just this area, I could use the crop tool and double click or hit return and crop to that area. If I didn't like that selection, or if I wanted to undo a crop, what I can do is go to my history panel, or I could choose Edit, Undo, Crop. If I choose Edit, Undo, I only have one undo to go back to. And then I can choose a different tool and not select that crop. But you'll notice if I move over to my history panel, which we'll talk more in another movie, is that everything that I do is located over here in the history panel up to a certain point. For me, I think I have it set to about 30 undo points or history points. So I'm able to see all the different things that I've done to my image inside the history panel. And I'm able to jump back to, let's say, one of my first options. And I can go back through my history panel and see all the different things that I've done. I can move back and forth between them as well with step forward or step backward over here in the edit menu. So I can step forward to different states in my history panel. Also remember, if you don't see your history panel, you can always go over to Window and show your history panel. So this is where all your states of undo are. So you also want to make sure that if you go back in time and then make a change from a certain point, everything in the future will be erased or gotten rid of. So you got to be careful when you're in your history panel. Some of the other tools, the eyedropper tool will pick up a specific color and put it as your foreground color. So if I want this specific skin tone as my foreground color, I could click on my eyedropper and it will choose that color as my foreground color. Some other tools we're going to get into for photo retouching, the spot healing brush and healing brush tool. So if I've got this spot healing brush tool and I wanted to fix this little blemish on the side of her forehead, I'm going to deselect my selection first, and I could paint over this area, let go, and it will fix that blemish. So you could use the healing brush tool in those options as well. The red eye tool obviously will get rid of red eye, and we'll talk about how the healing brush is different from the hot spot healing brush tool, and the patch tool is different from that, but they all have some similarities, and we'll get into those in a later exercise. Another one that's similar to the healing brush is the clone stamp tool. Basically, with the clone stamp tool or pattern stamp tool, you're able to option click on a specific area of your image and then paint in another area, and it clones over or clones that same area. So that's kind of what the healing brush was doing. It was taking an area that was around it and cloning it, not with a specific color, but with a pattern of color. So we can take a look at what those are later as well. Pattern stamp tool, I'm able to paint with different patterns and things like that I could choose from or I want to create. The eraser tool we've talked about. We've got the gradient tool. If I want to pick from different gradients and fill selections or entire areas with gradients, you can use the gradient tool. So we'll work with creating new gradients and filling areas with gradients with the gradient tool. We've got other tools that are kind of self-explanatory. If you roll over them, you can get the blur tool to blur areas of your image. You can sharpen areas or smudge areas of your image. You can go underneath that and get more tools that are reminiscent of traditional photo tools as far as development goes. You've got the dodge tool and the burn tool and the smudge tool, things to make your image darker or lighter, or areas of your image darker or lighter. So notice as I use my dodge tool, it's making those areas of the image lighter, or if I were to use the burn tool, it's making these areas of the image darker. Not necessarily adding black, it's just basically under or overexposing those areas of my image. Some of these other tools underneath we'll get to later on down in the class as well. Things like the pen tool that deals more with vector-based graphics. Same thing with the direct selection and selection tools. They deal with vector graphics and paths and things like that you'll introduce into your imagery. You've got a type tool that you can put typography in your image. Also realize that when you use the type tool, it creates type on a new layer. So in my layers panel, when I use the type tool, it will create a new layer again, which we'll get into in another movie. Lastly, down here I've got the shape tools, so I can create things like rectangles and squares and ellipses and lines and things like that. Even custom shape tools where I'm able to pick from a lot of these different custom shapes and add these things in here. There are different ways that these shape tools are implemented, whether they're a new layer or whether they just fill a color on a specific layer or where they add a path in the path panel. So all of these things that we talk about here that I've kind of briefly given an overview of what they do, we'll be getting into them a lot more in depth. So if things like layers and paths and those things like that are confusing you right now, don't worry, because these are things that, again, we're going to get into specifically with other movies. I just wanted to kind of give you an overview of what all these different tools are and what they do, and that way give you a better idea of where they are as we kind of move forward.